I said I was going to do this video anyway, but it just so happens that within the last 12 hours or so, there have been reports circulating that Yuki Tsunoda is going to be replacing Liam Lawson at Red Bull. And there's been a fair few memes made already about him being kicked out. They started after Melbourne. Secret Labs, the gaming chair people, launched their Red Bull Racing branded seats, and the vast majority of the comments were, "I'll give it a couple of months and then get a Lawson one on clearance." And then there's other memes about Checo sitting in his house laughing his head off, while the population of Mexico does the same thing. But all jokes aside, Lawson being ousted after 2 race weekends is fast, even by Red Bull standards. So there's the very real possibility that while putting this video together, the ousting of Lawson for Tsunoda will be made official. So I thought I'd get all this in first, because stuff happening while I'm in the process of writing about something that might happen has happened more than once. And then people comment about things aging like milk, so yeah, that's the housekeeping out the way. But like I said, I intended to do this video anyway, even without all these reports that have come out within the last 12-18 hours or so, because one thing that gets talked about is that Red Bull is the place where careers go to die. Since Verstappen was promoted to the senior Red Bull team in 2016, he's had teammates in Ricciardo, Gasly, Albon, Perez, and now Lawson. And every single one of those drivers has been removed from that second car in less than ceremonial circumstances. The only exception being Ricciardo, who left of his own volition, and some would say that killed his career trajectory. In the case of the others, the crime that they would have committed was they weren't as fast as Max. At least, that's how it's always appeared. And Red Bull has often been quite cutthroat. You hit the ground running or you end up being discarded and replaced. And Albon talked about this when he was on the High Performance podcast. He'd drive hard to keep up and would make mistakes, which would incur the criticisms of management, which would make him drive even harder and make more mistakes, which gets him more criticism, and it just snowballs from there. And when you're under the spotlight because you're always being compared to your teammate who is now a 4-time world champion, it's gonna suck for you. But the thing is, back then Red Bull had the potential to win a Grand Prix. Okay, it wasn't as good as the Ferraris or the Mercedes in that time frame, but if either of them messed up or the conditions were just right, then Max would be in a position to take a Grand Prix victory. Now though, things are, well, a little different. Red Bull had by far the best car of 2023. An absolute rocket ship of a car not seen since the 2016 Mercedes, the Ferrari F2004, or the McLaren MP44. The car was utterly dominant in the race everywhere except for Singapore, which was the only race a Red Bull didn't win that year. As such, Verstappen took a very easy title and Red Bull a very easy constructors title, with Verstappen and Perez finishing first and second in the drivers' standings. Going into 2024, a lot of people were getting braced for more of the same, with Verstappen and Perez finishing 1-2 in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, with the two cars suffering from brake issues in Australia. But normal service resumed for Japan, with China being a 1-3 with Norris getting in between the two Red Bulls. At the next race in Miami though, things started to take a little bit of a turn. Norris won that race as McLaren deployed the Hail Mary upgrade package, and Norris might have won at Imola if the race had been a lap or two longer. Verstappen was complaining about his tyres being ruined towards the end of that race. Verstappen finished 6th at Monaco while Perez had an utter mare. He would qualify towards the back end of the grid and would then be involved in the lap 1 carnage fest. After which, Verstappen was able to win in Canada and Spain, but after that, wins became hard to come by. It must have been inconceivable that since that Spanish Grand Prix, Mercedes would win more races than Red Bull would for the remainder of the 2024 season. But something had happened to that Red Bull at some point for it to certainly not be the car that it had been through 2023 and the first 6 or 7 races of 2024. It had gone from being an all-dominant rocket ship to being temperamental as hell, and causing its drivers a lot of frustration. A lot of people will call it highly convenient that the car stopped being God tier around the time the FIA said, yeah, if you are using an asymmetric braking system, you'd better knock it off now. A theory that's backed up by Verstappen's brakes playing havoc in Australia. So the car is on par with the Saubers, and Verstappen is just that good that he can make the car into something that it's not and potentially win races because he's the best driver of all time, right? Well, sort of. Hear me out here. The car by itself isn't slow as much as it might be weird to hear such a thing. There will be people on Twitter that will want to run this narrative that this car is as slow as a Sauber and it's Max's God-given talent taking it that high, but it's not quite that clear-cut. The car is quick, but it's an absolute diva to drive, and if you know how to get around the issues that present themselves, you'll be okay. If you don't, then you're going to make it look like it's the worst car on the grid by a country mile. If you can hold that car on the razor's edge, it's fine. Sort of. And there is credit to be given where the credit is due. These newer ground effect cars don't handle like the 2017 to 2021 cars did. They can't be driven the way they could in that time period, and these new cars can be quite sluggish to drive compared to these older cars. I mean, I say that, the only experience I will ever have of driving them is in the simulators. And while it is easier to get one of the 2020 cars to just go into a corner and stick, the newer ones are a lot harder to do so because the vast majority of the downforce is now coming from under the car as opposed to using all the intricate aero flaps on the front wing, the rear wing, the barge bores, the turning vanes and so on to generate the turn-in. And also going full face down booty up with the rake. So if you're somebody like Hamilton who likes to brake very, very late and carry the car to the apex on the brakes, it's a little harder to adjust to because the new cars can't do it as well. Smoother drivers might have an easier time, but if you're Red Bull, you're able to work out a way of being able to generate that turn in with the car and produce an absolute weapon of a competitor. And it showed. But since kind of the tail end of 2023 into the beginning of 2024 and then the middle of 2024, there have been a lot of problems that have manifested themselves that are a lot harder to hide than otherwise would have been. The car is no longer on rails and just chilling at 80% car and driver performance out in front to the easiest wins you could ever hope to have. It now has no grip on the front or the rear and could be understeering, oversteering or both in the corners. On the very first lap in China, Verstappen had a snap of oversteer in the very first corner that allowed the two Ferraris through. While Verstappen can extract a decent lap in qualifying where he only has to do one lap or maybe two laps on a set of tyres, as the race goes on, the Red Bull is just, well, chewing tyres. The only time it's ever going to have a chance is if the track gets very cold or it rains, as seen in Melbourne and Brazil. Initially in 2022 the Red Bull understeered, much like everybody else's because of the new regulations, but an early upgrade that year allowed Red Bull to induce some turn-in that was better suited to the way Max likes to drive the car, while Checo didn't do so well. As time has gone on, it seems that the car has leaned more and more and more towards Max's preference of having the car front heavy on the turn-in with a loose-ish rear end that only Max seems to be able to tame properly. Checo still had the room available to have the car set up to how he wanted it, even if it was still leaning towards Max. If there were any issues with things, Max could drive around them, much like Hamilton was able to adapt to the Diva that was his 2018 car, or Schumacher being able to get his 1996 Ferrari into a position to take advantage if Williams dropped the ball. Essentially, Max has his car set up like it's one of these super duper ultra eSport setups that you get for the racing games where you turn the car just a little bit, the back end steps out. If you can keep it on that knife edge, you're okay, but mere mortals like myself can't drive those setups. So how did Red Bull get it so wrong when everything was going so right? The race's Mark Hughes said that Red Bull is being punished for chasing pure aerodynamic load before a drivable balance, which, when you look at things, seems logical. Red Bull is chasing this turn-in that someone like Verstappen, who can control the car on that knife edge pretty well, and he can get around things when they're not working as they should. If you're a driver that wants the rear end stuck to the ground like Vettel, Checo and so on, or me, I guess, in the racing games, you're going to look stupid. And Alex Albon said in an article for the Players Tribune, the car is set up in a unique way that is built around the lead driver, and that's Max. And look, I totally get why. I mean, when all is said and done, he might be the greatest driver of all time, but he has a very distinct style of driving, and he likes the car set up a certain way that's hard for a lot of drivers to sync up with. Of course, you can tinker and tweak your own car, but just the Red Bull in general is suited to Max's style. And there are drivers who do like a pointy car, like Hamilton or Raikkonen, or insert another driver here. Some drivers are a bit smoother, so might want something pointy but a bit more stable. Albon is one of them. Jenson Button preferred a neutral handling car that wasn't too biased one way or another in terms of understeer and oversteer. But when it comes to having a spectrum of super pointy to super neutral or super understeery, the drivers will be concentrated somewhere near the middle. Max, meanwhile, has such a unique driving style, it's just incredibly far removed from anybody else. If you're looking at that same spectrum, you might see the two teammates from the different teams, and you might see them that they might be this far apart, or they might be this far apart, or they might be this far apart, but a little bit over here. The difference between Max and his teammate, whoever that might be, is like this. The difference between them is so massive that there's no overlap between the setups. Now, in the days of unlimited testing, maybe someone like Checo or Gasly or Albon or whoever might have been able to just test their way into getting used to the car and figuring out what it can and can't do with regards to how they want it set up. Now, though, they can't do that. So it's hit the ground running or don't even bother turning up for work. I mean, that's just how it appears from the Red Bull standpoint. But it's now got to a point where even Max is saying, lads, I can't do anything with this. At that point, you might have expected Red Bull to go, maybe it's not our drivers that are the problem after all. Because if our number one driver is saying the car is flawed, then maybe the car is, well, flawed. But it seems that Red Bull approaches the problem as, Max is getting this car onto the podium or at least the top 5 in every race, but the other guy is way off. So the issue is the driver. But the problem that Red Bull also has is, if they keep chopping and changing drivers, they're going to run out. The last 2 drivers they've got they can throw into that second car are Tsunoda and Ascher, and if the rumours and reports are true, then Tsunoda will have that chance in Japan. Now, he might get a couple of positions out of that car over Lawson because his driving style lends more to how the Red Bull needs to be driven, but will he be on par with Max? No, he won't. And then Red Bull will be going, you're bad, off you go, and then they might give Ascher the call up. But that would be pointless because Ascher has only done 1 full race and 1 sprint. He is nowhere near ready to go into that Red Bull. And Red Bull has managed to open the operating window of that car for the 2025 season, but it is still incredibly narrow. Narrow compared to the other 9 teams on the grid. So Verstappen is the only person that can get it into that window, let alone keep it there. And he's got to hold it on that razor's edge, right on the line all the time. Otherwise, the oversteer is going to kick in, the understeer is going to kick in, and all the other problems he has with that car are going to, well, kick in. So unless they clone Verstappen and have 2 Verstappens in the 2 cars, that's the only way they're going to run anywhere near each other. Or unless they can find somebody else that can handle that car, and the list of people that can handle that kind of car is incredibly short. And in a way, all it serves to do is make Red Bull look silly. Albon, Gasly and Checo over the years have proven that they're not rubbish drivers. Lawson has had a decent junior career and his performance in the Toro Rosso, or whatever we're calling it now, at Austin last year was fantastic. Albon described the Red Bull as being like playing a video game with the controller or mouse sensitivity cranked up to 300%. There are some gamers out there that like it that way, and they're brilliant with it because they know exactly how far to move the mouse to put the crosshair on the other player and blow his head off. The vast majority of us other gamers can't do that because we always go too far because we don't know how to handle that sensitive of an input. And this is the corner that Red Bull has backed itself into. They've chased this front-heavy design with a loose rear that Max likes, but have now reached the absolute limit of where it can go. Horner claimed before that Red Bull doesn't necessarily build the car for one particular driver, but goes for what makes the car fast. So chasing this philosophy allows Max, in particular, to be able to drive that car, well, fast. And even when the first cracks began to show towards the end of 2023, Max was able to paper over those cracks. In mid-2024, he was still able to drive around those problems, but then Hungary showed that he was becoming frustrated with how the car was handling, and his expletive-laden outburst being broadcast to the world. So it leads back into the whole, well, Max is doing it, why can't you thing? And by the time Monaco rolled around last year, Perez had fallen off the cliff after finishing in the top 5 times in the 6 races leading up to Monaco. And his 5th place in Australia was because of brake issues, the same ones Max had, so it wasn't exactly a skill issue that had put him there. But it was clear that there was something not right, because he didn't finish higher than 6th for the rest of the season. And when his fall-off coincides with the Red Bull suddenly being quite difficult to drive and visibly difficult to drive, there has to be dots connected. Apparently the same thing happened with Honda in MotoGP. They kept on building the bikes exactly to how Marc Marquez wanted them, so he was able to ride them and do incredible things with them. But as soon as Marquez left the team, they were nowhere because nobody could drive the bikes in the same way. It's not drive bikes, is it? It's ride. But either way, Honda screwed themselves because they leaned too much towards one unique style. And despite renewing Checo's contract for another 2 years, Red Bull saw fit to dump the Mexican after his 2024 mid-season slump echoed a drop-off that he had towards the end of 2023. At the end of 2023, he finished 10th in Qatar, retired in Mexico, was 4th in Brazil, 3rd in Vegas, and 4th at Abu Dhabi. And while he did open the 2024 season strongly, the mid-season slump, which also coincided with Max's inability to keep papering over cracks, crept in, and then they got rid of him at the end of the season to replace him with Liam Lawson. And now, as I record this, the BBC has reported that this move is apparently going to happen. So when the BBC and Sky Sports get their hands on these kinds of things, they are pretty much official. So it looks like Tsunoda will be in the car for Japan. Which makes no sense whatsoever. Like I said, Checo isn't a terrible driver. Some of the stuff he did in those Force Indias and Racing Points was incredible. And now you've got Albon in that Williams, doing pretty well for himself. Gasly won a race in 2020 after being sent back to AlphaTauri. The issue is, when you're being compared to a generational talent, you're always going to look bad. Barrichello and Bottas were the same, but they weren't anywhere near as far off Schumacher or Hamilton because the overlap between what the two drivers want from the car is much closer than it is over at Red Bull. But now, if Max is struggling to make the podium, then the other guy is as good as screwed. The seat isn't necessarily cursed. It's that Red Bull has got one driver who has a much higher ceiling than the other driver, and they don't have that overlap window that some of the other teams have to balance it between what the two drivers want. Like I've said before, I think Yuki might do okay if he can get around the loose rear end on that Red Bull, but I'm not expecting him to be as close to Max as Ricciardo might have been 8 years or so ago. But doing all of this after just 2 races is a bit of a piss take. So what does this mean for the future? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if later on in the season, rumours about Max to Aston Martin, or Max to Mercedes, or Max out of F1 altogether start being flung around. In the last 12 months, Red Bull has lost Adrian Newey and they've lost Jonathan Wheatley. And in 2023, they lost Rob Marshall to McLaren. 12 months later, McLaren were the Constructors' Champions and Marshall was the guy on the podium with Oscar and Lando on Sunday. And Max did come to Liam's defence, saying, if you look at the difference between the two drivers at the other teams, they are all closer together. It also shows that our car is incredibly difficult. I think that when you put Liam in the Racing Bull, he will go faster. That car is easier to drive than ours. I noticed that when I talked to Liam. Last year, the difference between him and Yuki was not that big, I thought. Otherwise, the team would not make the choice to put him in the Red Bull. And now with Yuki looking certain to replace Liam for the Japanese Grand Prix, what's going to happen if Liam ends up beating him? What happens if it's Yuki qualifying on the back row? What happens if Yuki stacks it trying to keep up? What does Red Bull do then? Do they put Liam back in the Red Bull and send Tsunoda back to Racing Bulls? Do they put Hadjar in instead? How many more times can they chop and change a driver and have it seem like it's the driver that's the problem? People are wishing Yuki luck, and he's going to need it. And if Max does end up leaving Red Bull at the end of the season, either to follow Newey over to Aston Martin or to go to Mercedes or out of F1 altogether because he's got a young family now, what's going to happen then? How are things going to change? Because I think if Max does end up leaving Red Bull, that team is going to have a fall-off similar to how McLaren did when Senna left. But I'd like to know what you think down in the comments. So then, a look at the Liam Lawson situation over at Red Bull, and whether if it is indeed a curse or just Red Bull not looking at wider issues. If this piece has given you some food for thought, then by all means like the video so I know I did a good job, and for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks go out to the mad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help contribute to the picture purchasing piggy bank or keep the lights on, there will be a link to Patreon down in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.